Thank you, Indigo. And thank you so much, Ruby. This is a really interesting pairing of presentations because, as you'll see, I'm talking in a very positive sense about data. So I'm also really looking forward to that discussion afterwards, and I feel compelled to tell everybody I'm wearing a Casio watch. And the locus of our analysis, as you will see in my presentation, is not the individual. And that is because I work at Creative Australia. I work in the research team where we conduct a lot of research on the arts and cultural sector. But before I describe a little more, I will just also thank John for the welcome to country this morning and acknowledge that we are on traditional lands. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I also acknowledge that wherever we are in Australia, on whatever country, this land was never ceded. So yes, Creative Australia, we're the federal arts investment and advisory body. We have a sizable research team that addresses the evolving data and information needs of our sector, and we do that in order to inform policy. So that, I guess, is to identify the issues that need addressing in the arts and cultural sector and ideally have them positively recognised in policy and in other forms of support. But also our research is to assist the sector in its own strategic decision making, its planning for the future, and to do the advocacy about its impacts to government or to other kinds of investors or institutions. These are our research priorities, so anything that helps us better understand and support First Nations, arts and culture in Australia. Also equity and diversity, which I think is a really important one because there is also this role that data plays in providing accountability, like transparency. In the case of the arts and cultural sector, is it properly representing all of Australians in their full demographics and providing access to arts and culture for those people? We also do research on the artists' workforce, but also other people in the arts and cultural sector, so that's the people who do technical work or other roles that put on the show. Audiences and engagement, I'm going to talk a bit about that today, and as well as value and impact. So there are various kinds of impacts or values that we track, and we would use different methodologies for each different kind of project. So if there's cultural impacts that we're looking at, or social impacts, or economic impacts, we would come at those in different ways. So a big kind of intervention in Australia's arts sector over the last few years was this National Cultural Policy, which was launched in early 2023. And the role that data plays in that, particularly from a researcher's perspective, is really noticeable. I think that the importance of research and insights is really elevated in that policy. So along with a whole lot of actions to support creative production and audience development, there were a few actions that were addressing research needs. And the biggest one was this one that we've been charged with, which is to produce a State of Australian Culture report. And this will be triennial. Every 3 years this will come out and give us a sense of the kind of health of the sector in a sort of ecological way. And that metaphor is not only my own. The Minister likened it to the State of Environment report when we asked, what do you mean? Think of the State of Environment report, which is also a really great indication of the importance of arts and culture in a kind of federal government's context. And it means that the way that we're approaching it is to look at all the different parts of the sector and to ensure that they're in balance. So perhaps it's not enough to say that production is going up if we don't have the audiences to kind of balance that. This report will cover music, performing arts, literature, visual arts, screen and digital games, and it's because of those last two that we're working in partnership with Screen Australia. And it's going to have a few components. These are all going to be launched in the middle of this year. So it's going to have a website, which will always exist, and that will have data sets which are doing that kind of metric work of tracking in quantitative ways, but it will also have spotlights and recognise that some things need a qualitative approach, but that will always be updated. And it'll have these set indicators that might also be updated over time. But then every 3 years, we will check in and say, okay, so we've got all this information, we've got all this data, it's been on the website. Let's write a report, a kind of point-in-time analysis that pulls all that together and checks what is the state of culture at the moment. So that will be the triennial report, and there will also be a self-led, First Nations-led standalone First Nations report, and the first one is going to be done by Professor Sandra Phillips. Hopefully she will continue to do these every 3 years with us as we go along. So this is going to be important for advising government, but we really hope it will be extremely important for the sector. We're drawing on not only our own data sets, but a whole lot of other things that exist in the sector and pulling them together. And now I'm going to talk you through 3 reports that are sort of current for us. Not all of them are published yet, so you get a little bit of a preview. That have this focus on digital engagement and audience development, because I figure that sort of fits with the theme of the conference. And this first one is one we do every 3 years. The next one of these, our National Arts Participation Survey, the next one is going to be coming out in kind of late May, early June. What it is a big survey. It's one of our flagship pieces. We do a big survey on artists, but we also do this one on audiences. And it's nationally representative, so it's not only looking at audiences, actually. It's better to say that it's the Australian public. And through that, we track attendance, but also engagement with reading or listening to music, as well as making. So if people are going to community choirs or making work, perhaps online, we track that as well as sentiments towards the arts. Its requirements for support, so funding, for example, but also the benefits and impacts, why people go, and why they think it should be supported. But yeah, increasingly over time, we've been including questions on digital engagement to track that. Surprise, surprise, digital engagement is increasing. And then throughout, like across all of those indicators, we always do breakdowns to understand the different demographics who are going or who want to go more, and everything else that we ask in that survey. So the most recent one, this one was published in 2023, but the survey was conducted in 2022. We've already done our 2025 survey, which will be published in 26. But to give you a sense of what it looks like, I thought I would share some findings from this last one. So this last one was a check-in after COVID, like, are we recovering? And many things were really consistent from before COVID to after, so there's certainly a sense that of recovery. So this percentage of Australians who engage in the arts always sort of hovers around 97, 98. It was 97% in the last one. 84% of Australians acknowledge the positive impacts of arts and creativity. 68% attended live. 61% agreed that the arts should receive public funding. So that's a kind of consistent set of measures that we see, and through which we can understand how Australians feel about the arts. In this one, we were really interested to see how attendance had fared during and after COVID. It was certainly in recovery, but frequency had dropped. So you can imagine now with this next National Arts Participation Survey that we're writing at the moment, we're really interested to see how frequency is tracking. And also throughout a bunch of our research projects where we're looking particularly at audiences and Australians, we're interested in this relationship between arts participation and wellbeing. So in the National Arts Participation Survey, we have this kind of consistent measure. It's about 56% believe that the arts benefit our wellbeing, but in this particular report coming out of COVID, we'd seen an increase from around about a quarter to around about a third of Australians who were not just recognising that, but acting on it. And that was the reason that they were participating in the arts. Young Australians, worth looking at if we think about audience development. So young Australians in this kind of broader age bracket of 15 to 34, they're more likely to attend. So 84% compared with the 68% of Australians in general. More likely to recognise the positive impacts, more likely to read for pleasure. Big caveat on that one. If you look at reading every day, it's the 65-year-olds and over. They're twice as likely than this group to be reading every day. I think it's 27% rather than 12%. But still, just reading for pleasure at all, the young Australians are the most likely. And then when you look at a tighter age bracket for young Australians, you see that they're the most likely to creatively participate, to make art, to participate in kind of artistic activity, 2/3 being involved. And then the most likely, perhaps not surprisingly, to be using digital platforms for that interaction, for that creativity. Things like making videos, image galleries, memes, music, songs. Really huge jump, right? 62% for that younger age group. It's like double the general population. And then highly engaged with the arts online, 9 in 10 using digital platforms to participate. And here I was saying it's no surprise, digital engagement in general is going up. This is the last National Arts Participation Survey. 88% was up from 82% 3 years earlier. And then there's a little kind of bubble to the right. That 71% is people who are using digital platforms in particular. So stay tuned. Late May, the 2026 edition will come out, and it's got additional questions in it. One of them is asking about AI, how people feel about AI in the process of creative production, how interested they are in using it to produce creative work, and yeah, whether or not they have done that. Who is sharing creative content, why and how? And this, I think, is this sort of grey zone between audiences and artists that we see growing with uptake of digital technology, because it is by nature really interactive. So people are far less likely to only be consuming, they're participating. As audiences, we need sort of, perhaps audiences and artists are not the right terms, but so we're asking some of these questions in the participation survey as well. The experiences with and attitudes towards fake art is something that we were asked to track by the National Cultural Policy. So we're asking that in this next version of that participation survey. But also on audience development, we've asked this question about whether or not people received an arts education in their school years. And I can, again, give you a preview. Does it have an impact on their arts participation later on? It certainly does, and you'll see the extent of that when the report comes out. This is the second of these 3 reports that I'm going to quickly introduce you to. This one has been conducted in partnership with University of Canberra and RMIT, and it's all about digital creativity or interaction online with creative activities. But we put these questions, so there's an existing annual survey that is run by this research consortium called ACMI. It's called the Australian Survey of Social Attitudes. And they had this one last year that was focused on digital societies. So we're like, oh yeah, we'll put in some questions about digital arts engagement, or engagement with creative activities using the internet. But then when we got the survey back, it was really fantastic because the survey had already asked, this is nationally representative, so very, very helpful. It had already asked in other sections questions about loneliness, like, do you feel lonely? How often do you feel lonely? Is loneliness a problem for you? It also asked questions about trust. Do you have trust in other people, in society, trust in people you meet online? So we could get the responses to our questions about digital arts participation and then cross-reference them with people's responses about loneliness. And there are some really, really interesting correlations. But before I get on to those, yes, these are the kind of areas that we've looked at that we now have data on for these kinds of digital participation. So consumption includes streaming music, watching performances, viewing virtual exhibitions, playing digital games. We know we've asked about interaction, so engaging with an online arts community, following or interacting with artists, researching or reviewing artists, learning to make art, sharing or posting videos, and then making, sharing, but also monetizing content online. Interesting demographic kind of changes across those categories, seeing who's sort of some class things coming through there. But like I suggested, we've got these really interesting associations emerging between young people. So young people are really emerging as a demographic of interest in this research report. Young people are the most likely to digitally participate, perhaps no surprise. Those young people are also the most likely to self-report loneliness. And then it's young people who are digitally participating who are also most likely to report loneliness. So if you think of a Venn diagram of young people, digital arts participation and loneliness, we've got a very big overlap in the middle. What we don't know from this research is cause and effect. So in no way can we say it's because they're online that they're lonely, or they're online because they're trying to address their loneliness. But there are certainly these associations that mark out an area that could certainly benefit from further research, particularly given those who digitally participate in the arts are also the most likely to say that they would feel lonely without the internet. Again, kind of disrupts any easy assumptions around cause and effect. And then, again, these positive associations between young people, those who digitally engage with creative content, but also then the most likely to trust. So those who are young, who are digitally engaging, are also the most likely to trust not only people in society broadly, offline, but online. So super interesting associations. And this project has raised a whole lot of other questions for us, some of which we can answer in the report and some of which I think we can't. But just thinking about if you remove the digital, I don't know, are young people engaging in the arts because they're melancholy? Has it always been thus? I think of myself listening to The Cure's Disintegration, age 16 in my bedroom, and I wonder if we need a moral panic or not. And then the last report that I wanted to introduce you to is called Street Dance in Focus. This is a great example of how data is certainly seen to be servicing needs beyond data itself, I think, because we were approached by Cypher Culture, who are a street dance organisation based in Melbourne. I hear they're really conspicuous here because they dance outside of the state library. And they really wanted data on their community because they didn't have it, and the visibility would give them, I guess, a kind of legitimacy, as well as knowing themselves. It would give them an opportunity to work in partnership with organisations like ours, but also other institutions that could provide some form of support and sustainability for their practice. It was a really fantastic project that I think is also relevant within this presentation I'm giving on digital arts participation and audience development, because the street dance community, as a practice, it is so embedded within community. And it's a little like what I was saying about digital engagement, the blur between the artist and the audience we see here. This community, almost everybody is a dancer as well. Everybody is a participant in the sense that it was actually Jeffrey Lim from Cypher Culture has said the thing he loves about this report is that it shows this community as a cultural ecology rather than a performance outcome. And that's really particular, I think, to this and other kind of creative communities like it. So that was why we got 417 people filling in the survey, which doesn't happen. It's really hard to get people to fill in surveys. Researchers out there, you will know this to be true. And then 54 additional partials. It was sweet. Street dance people, they wanted every single person in street dance in Australia to fill it in, but I reckon that's a pretty good percentage. So through this, we get demographics of the community. We learn about the roles that they play in that community, training, how they work, where they train, and how they're funding their practice, but their aspirations too for the future. And so demographics is one of the really fun findings in this report, particularly if you think about audience development. Perhaps many will know that in the performing arts, there is a real issue with audiences being old and white, not in this community. Approximately half of the street dance community were 25 to 34, and then another third, 18 to 24. So like, what is that, 4/5 or something? We're in that, what we often call like a younger age bracket. Over half identified as women, 2/5 as men, 4% of non-binary, but also 2/3 of respondents were self-identifying as CALD. And I don't know if you can see, I mean, that chart to the left, that's the CALD identification. But then to the right, it's all the languages that are spoke other than English at home. It's really fun. It's like a really fantastic array of languages. And that really long bottom one is other. And there are many, many languages in there. They're largely Asian languages. And then there's Spanish, which could be the Philippine, like Tagalog is in there as well. Also, 3/4 of respondents are making and sharing their videos of dance practice online. So this is really relevant to, it's an interesting example, perhaps a bit like skating and parkour, these really urban, physical, place-based cultures that have been enabled and upscaled by digital technology. Here, I think, is a really great example of that, how important digital tech is for this scene. Almost all respondents had watched competitions online, like 95%, and then roughly 3/4 had done their training, like viewing tutorials, workshops, or dance classes online. And then, again, we can see the importance of community here. These are all ways in which people have sought funding, and then the success rates with that attempt. Crowd or community funding is the most popular, and it's equal most popular, but it's the most successful. And then the other one, equal most popular, is sponsorship, which is super interesting as an art form because that is not the most common kind of funding arrangement for an arts organisation that Creative Australia is usually involved with. Creative Australia and the other usual players for subsidising the arts, they're kind of quite far down the list. And I think, is that my last slide? Yes. We have even more reports other than these that are upcoming that are looking at audiences. There's a real focus on audiences for us at the moment. So a huge one on arts participation of children from ages 2 to 15. It's a really difficult age group to do research with. So this is a very important report, and it's covering all the things that Creative Australia funds, as well as screen and digital games. That one will be out in kind of May. And then another one on reading. We know that reading rates are dropping. This is seeking to kind of better understand how we might address that. And that, I think, is that.